Powder Tech got a new lens review for you. You ready? Yeah. Let's go. Powder Tech, you don't wanna miss 2025, bringing you new Fujifilm tricks. Talking gear and lenses from Aperture and ISO. Shout out to Gary Guana, he's the coolest homie I know. 16 to 55 millimeter, is the old one better? Powder Tech will tell you. 16 to 55 millimeter, is the old one better? Powder Tech will tell you. Let's go. Powder Tech, take it away.
Well, hi everyone. Welcome to Powder Tech. Today we are talking about the brand new Fujifilm 16 to 55 millimeter RLMW-R2. Let's break this lens name down. It's 16 to 55 millimeter with an aperture ring. That's what the R means right here. Now the LM stands for linear motor. What is a linear motor? A linear motor works by using electromagnetic fields to move the focusing elements, resulting in a quieter motor. The WR, that means weather resistant. And finally, the most important designator of them all. This little mark right here, you see that? 2. That's right, after 9 years since the release of the original 16 to 55, we've got a second generation. Now, I've used the original 16 to 55 on an almost daily basis around this channel, and I have said before that having this zoom lens is just like having the versatility and the image quality of 4 Fujifilm prime lenses all rolled up into one. Fujifilm North America did send this lens to me so that I could take a look at it. It is a loaner copy, meaning that I've got to return it back to Fujifilm right as soon as I'm finished shooting this video. I was not paid in any way, and no one at Fujifilm was allowed to see any of the content until right now when it's been published live for all of you. Taking it out of the box, it became very clear to me that this new lens is extremely different than the original, most notably the weight. When I first picked it up, I could not believe how much lighter this lens is. The original lens weighs 655 grams, while the new lens weighs 410 grams. And yes, you definitely notice the difference. Next, the size. This lens is considerably smaller. Look here at the size difference. It's still big, but it's manageable. Even with the small grip and the small form factor of the XM5, this lens was not a problem combining it with this camera. However, if you put the original 16 to 55 on it, it's just too large. It feels too large. It wears out your wrist after a while. And as far as an X-T5 camera is concerned, just great. Now, the filter size on the top of the lens has been reduced to 72 millimeters. Like the original 16 to 55, the aperture range is from f2.8 to f22, with the ability to have a constant f2.8 aperture all the way throughout the entire range. The minimum focus distance on the lens is now 30 centimeters. There are 16 elements in 11 groups, and now the new lens has 11 rounded aperture blades, which is an upgrade from the previous 9 blades in the original. The aperture ring itself has been completely redesigned. You have this switch right here. When you have it switched to click, the aperture ring rotates exactly the same as the original, where it's click, 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 click. Obviously, when you slide the click switch into the off position, you no longer have the aperture clicking sounds, and you have a very smooth aperture change. They've also added a locking switch, which you need to use in order to put the aperture into automatic. This is a very tight lock switch, which means you're not going to accidentally put the aperture ring in automatic anytime soon. There is one thing that I did notice. The aperture clicking sounds on the new lens are much softer than the ones on the old lens. Listen to the difference. Something to note is that this lens has no built-in image stabilization, which means that it is much better suited for camera models like the X-T5 that already have built-in IBIS, particularly if you're shooting video. Let's talk image quality now. I found that the image quality on the new lens either exceeded or matched the image quality of its predecessor. I found that the background isolation and depth of field to be similar to the previous version of the lens. It is really nice to have this lens on a camera with a 40 megapixel sensor. I was also impressed by the level of detail, depth of field, and sharpness given the greatly reduced size and weight of the lens. It did a good job handling low light rendering of color with higher ISOs. As you stop down the lens, the star effects are pretty noticeable, a little bit more than the original lens. There is something I do want to point out about the image quality of this lens. If you just load up a RAW file and you don't make any adjustments to it at all, you are going to notice the vignetting. You see it here, you see it here. However, let's take a look now at the JPEG file that has the lens corrections applied. Boom. You see that? This to this. Let's take a closer look now. Here we are zoomed in all the way at 55 millimeters, f2.8, and here it is at 100%. Great performance at the center at f2.8. Clearly at the corners here, you can see some vignetting. Watch it disappear now as I increase the aperture. There's a little bit of softness, but it is reasonably sharp. f3.2, f3.6, and f4 zooming in. And as you go through each aperture range, stepping down the lens, it remains sharp. I start to see the softness in the center appear right around f14. f22, definitely softness in the center. Let's go back to f4 and take a look at the corners now. Going from f4, nice and sharp at f5.6, f11, and it still looks good. Once we hit f20, it starts to get a little bit soft. Here's f22. Here I am at the mid focal length, about 28 millimeters, even zoomed in 200%. Have a look at that. Jumping to f5.6, looks absolutely stellar. Even f8. However, once you go past f8, you can start to see some softness when you get to about f14. That increases as we stop down to f22. Let's look at 16 millimeters, f2.8, and it looks pretty good. 3.2, it gets better. Here's f5.6, and I notice things start to become a little bit softer after around the f10 aperture. Let's take a look at the corner performance as we continue throughout the focal range, and I think very good results even all the way down to f16. At f22, yeah, you're going to get a little bit of softness there for sure. Now let's compare this to the older version of the lens. Here we are at 55 millimeters at f2.8 in the center. Let's zoom into 200%. Still can't tell. Let's go further. 300%. 400%. As far as I'm concerned, they're pretty much the same. Let's flip to the opposite side, the 16 millimeter wide view, and see what we get. Pretty similar. Let's go to 300%. This right here compared to here. Okay, let's just move on. As far as I'm concerned, these two lenses are pretty much identical if they're put on an X-T5 and you shoot a wall and you zoom in at, 2, 3, 4, 500%. Let's talk autofocus. I found the autofocus to be noticeably better than the first version of the lens. Face eye followed the subject on an X-T5 more accurately than the older version of the lens. I was using the latest firmware as of the date of this video. Sometimes shots were missed, but on average, I noticed that it did slightly outperform the previous version of the lens. And I also found it to be better than the older version of the lens with regard to subjects suddenly appearing. For example, it's focused right at this area here. Now watch how fast the camera focuses when the subject jumps right in the middle of the focus area of the lens. So we're here and boom. See how fast that was? Where it did struggle a little bit, just like the old one, was with very rapidly moving subjects coming right toward the lens. It immediately recognized the dog, no problem, da-da-da-da-da, and then the dog starts running, and again, side to side wasn't as bad. Now let's look at it going straight toward the camera. And for this one, I set AFC to ignore obstacles and continue to track the subject. And in the beginning, it is still keeping up with the subject, and it was about right there it failed, kind of jumped right off. I shot this with the X-T5 using the latest firmware update as of today. Now, I did find that for video, autofocus was fast, smooth, and also accurate. It worked very well. One of the biggest issues with shooting video on any lens, especially, say, with a non-IBIS camera like the X-T3, has to do with image stabilization. There's no built-in image stabilization. So if you are using the lens on a non-IBIS camera, you're going to have shaky footage. However, here it is using the built-in IBIS on the X-T5. An IS mode boost right here makes a huge difference when you turn it on. Now, there's something very important I need to talk to you about. The aperture ring on the new lens. And particularly when you put it in that clickless mode, you now have smooth exposure changes. not all cameras will support it. On the XM5, it's like someone just turned out the lights slowly. However, put it on an X-T5 with the latest firmware update as of today. Watch what happens now when I rotate the aperture ring. See how it's going, dug, 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 dug. I then noticed it did the same thing on the X-T3. Same issue, jump, jump, jump. Why would it work on this camera, but not this camera? I went back to the Fujifilm website, may require firmware update of applicable X series body. My guess is that the firmware update, the latest one we got in December of 2024 for the X-T5, only dealt with autofocus. And perhaps another firmware is coming very soon that will work with this lens and make this lens act on the X-T5 as it does on the XM5 and perhaps other newer cameras. I don't know. Now, for those of you who are like me and already own the original 16 to 55 millimeter lens, should you upgrade and get this newer version? For some of you, yes. For most of you, probably no. The number one change, the biggest reason, is the ergonomics, particularly the lighter weight. It is a world of difference when you're out all day with it. If you travel a lot, this is your answer because this one you will. It's a great lens for that. If, however, you do not care about the size and weight, say it's mounted on a camera on a tripod in a studio all the time and you could care less about traveling with it, I don't think you need to upgrade. If you're a video shooter, does having the clickless aperture ring matter? If that's important to you, then absolutely. This is a wonderful clickless aperture. It's worth upgrading. And finally, for those of you who have never owned or used the original 16 to 55 millimeter zoom lens from Fujifilm, you have no idea what you're missing. It is very worth it to get this lens because this, as I said about the original, I will say again, this lens, the new one, is like having 4 prime lenses in one. But I will now add in a size and form factor that's suitable for travel and works much better with cameras like the XM5. Anyhow, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you found the video helpful, or at least entertaining. And if you did, be sure to give it the like and subscribe. I will see you in a new video very soon. Take care.